Pechuekonis. She has 2 books available in the back. I'll tell you a little bit about them in a second, and she will sign them and sell them to you. Lynn is a West Virginia native, currently residing in Harper's Ferry. After a lengthy career in communications at the University of Virginia, she returned to her home state and became fascinated with the historic achievements of Black residents there. Among the mountains, the Lovetts and their hilltop house, which is the topic for tonight, is her second published biography. Her first book, Man of Sterling Worth, explores the life of Professor William A. Saunders, the longest-serving Black teacher at Storer College, also in Harper's Ferry. Lynn and her husband live in the Saunders home, 1 block away from the former college, and operate a small bed and breakfast there. This month, the Jefferson County Historical Society magazine will publish her article titled The Evolution of a Black Community in Post-War Harper's Ferry. Lynn chairs the board of the Harper's Ferry Boulevard Historic Town Foundation and serves on the board of the Jefferson County Convention and Visitor Bureau. She frequently gives talks and tours on Harper's Ferry Black heritage, covering Reconstruction through the Civil Rights era. Now, the books I mentioned are both in the back, and Lynn will happily sign them for you after the talk is over. The Lovetts and their hilltop house, among the mountains, the Lovetts and their hilltop house is $25, and Man of Sterling Worth is $20. And I'm sure that if you wanted to, you could buy them both, and she would sign them both. So let me turn it over to Lynn, who will use the microphone to figure it out.
Thank you. Thank you.
And do we need the lights down low?
Good evening. Let's see, can you hear me? Is it working?
Oh, you turned the off. I didn't realize.
You saw what?
All right. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
And I want to say hello to the folks watching on the live stream and who will be watching later on YouTube. Just want to clarify that I am the copyright on this presentation, and I ask that it not be modified, distributed, or used in any other way without my permission. Thanks. Okay, let's get on with it. So I will give you a little more background. So my husband and I were visiting Harper's Ferry in the fall of 2016.
Sorry, folks.
There we go. My husband and I were visiting Harper's Ferry in the fall of 2016.
What is this?
I'm going to talk loud here for just a few minutes until they get that figured out. Anyway, we came upon this house in Harper's Ferry while we were visiting, and just on a lark, it was for sale. We decided to check it out and just totally fell in love with the house, not knowing its history. And we decided, without any prior plans, to move away from Charlottesville, Virginia, where we were living, to buy the house and move to beautiful Harper's Ferry. And at that time, I didn't know anything about the Hilltop House, and I didn't know anything about the original owner of the home that we were buying. But it turns out it was the home of the longest-serving professor at Storer College. And I was able to do some research and learn about what a prominent person he was. Anybody need me to tell you what Storer College is? Is everybody familiar? Okay. So Storer College was started right after the Civil War.
I'm gonna leave if I can't hear you. No point in saying if I can't hear.
I don't know if I can talk any louder.
Well, they need to get the sound system fixed.
They're fixing it here on Thursday, and it'll be brand new, but this is all we have to do. I'm so sorry. It was working with
And that's an office. Your country.
Okay.
It's not. Kids just stand here, and that's how you help. It's not that microphone, because it's this. That's all there is. It's literally like this. While you're waiting for them, since I missed like the first couple minutes, can you tell me what I might have missed in the first couple minutes?
I don't think you missed anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but who are you then?
I'm Lynn Pechuekonis, named there at the bottom of the book.
Okay,
And I live in Harper's Ferry.
okay.
And I was just talking about this first book that I wrote and how I had a connection with Professor Saunders.
Okay.
Right after the Civil War. For that.
We're gonna Frankenstein this thing into being.
So, he and his wife were the ones that had the house.
No, Professor Saunders was the longest serving black teacher at Storr College, and I was gonna, a couple of you didn't know about Storr College, so I'm gonna talk about that real quick, and hopefully by the time I finish with that part, I'll have the microphone working. But Storr College was started in 1867. Some missionaries from New England were abolitionists before the war, and they came down to Harper's Ferry, and were trying to help educate the newly freed people after the Civil War, and they started the school to educate folks and also to be a teacher's college, a normal school they called it at that time. And so it was a private school funded by New England folks, but with a partnership with the federal government in Harper's Ferry. The Freedmen's Bureau was there and donated, helped facilitate a donation of government land to the school. So in Harper's Ferry along Fillmore Street, if you've ever been there, there are 7 acres of land and 4 brick buildings that formerly belonged to Armory officers. And those became the hub of Storr College. And it was open until 1955, educated hundreds of black students, thousands of black students from throughout the region.
So it was actually for black students only?
So the original ideal was to educate students of any race and any gender, but in 1870, West Virginia passed a law that black and white students could not be educated together. So it essentially became a black only school from that point on.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. All right,
And the missionaries came from
New England.
New England? I thought
Yes.
that's what I heard, but I wanted to make
Yes.
sure. Okay, thank you.
Yes, the Free Will Baptists.
Were the Free Will Baptists African American, or were they?
They were white.
They were white.
So they sent a lot of their missionaries down, including Nathan Brackett, who became the founding head of the school. And interestingly, the school was run by white administrators from 1867 until 1944.
Can you turn that off? No, who's?
Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Try my best.
Guess not.
Murphy's Law. That can go wrong.
There we go. Can you hear me? All right. Yay.
Okay, I'm gonna hold my fingers down this.
You just had to stand there for an hour.
It's
No.
working.
So anyway, on with the story. I had just finished publishing this book when the Harper's Ferry Park Association asked me if I would be interested in writing about the Lovetts. And there was a good connection, and I'll tell you here. So I also am very excited because since I published that book just a couple of months ago, a miracle really happened, and I was able to obtain this box of letters that Professor Saunders wrote to his fiance and then wife later on. So there are hundreds of personal letters in here that I didn't have access to when I wrote the book. So there's going to be a revision coming out one of these days. I'm still getting, there's hundreds of letters, and I've only gotten through about half of them. But we'll see a little excerpt from one of the letters later on in the presentation. But I will also say I have some Christmas cards that were sent to the Saunders between the 1920s and 1930s, and one of them was from Mrs. Lovett. Mrs. Lavinia Lovett. I've checked the signature and it matches. So Harper's Ferry is a small town, of course, and everybody knew each other pretty much. So it's not surprising that they had a connection, but I have it in writing. Okay, so this was the first book to really look at the history of the founding of the Hilltop and the Lovett family. I'm not going to go through all those different sources that we use, but I had a couple of volunteer helpers to go through all the documents that we could find so that we could get on to writing a lot quicker, and I really appreciated their help. We had some challenges because there were no direct descendants of the Lovetts. They had, Thomas and Lavinia had 2 daughters, neither of whom had children. So there was nobody around to maintain the family photos and documents. And also there were no private financial records available. They have not been found ever. So we were limited to what's available in the public record. And so sometimes there's gaps in our knowledge because we might know what happened, but not why it happened. And tonight I'll maybe ask your help with thinking through a couple of those little mysteries. All right, who here has visited the Hilltop when it was still open?
I didn't even know.
Great, great. So in Harper's Ferry, up on Magazine Hill, anybody want to share a memory? What was it like when you were there?
I just remember a fancy restaurant we eating inside, and it was very nice.
Looking out over the river? Yes.
So by the time we got there, the place was in a sad shape. So the view was beautiful. Everything was nice.
Yeah, beautiful view, but the building was getting very run down. It was very much important.
When did it close?
It closed in 2007.
Oh, so it's been pretty recent.
Yes.
Wow. We did before mine.
Anybody else want to share a memory? Yes.
When I worked in my state, around one time, they were on stage, dinners and breakfast.
Great, great. Anybody remember the fried chicken? I hear about that a lot when I'm talking about the Hilltop House, or when people post on Facebook about it. There's lots of memories of good fried chicken there. Of course, this was in later decades, long after the founders were gone. But did anybody who visited the Hilltop know that the founders of the Hilltop were African American? You heard that. Not very many people learned that when they were visiting. And so they're often surprised to find out how the Hilltop got started.
So it was actually an inn and a restaurant.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to go back through some context about when the Hilltop started. Back in, it started in 1890, but in this era, we're between the end of Reconstruction, which was 1876, and the Jim Crow era was really beginning to kick up in 1890. A lot of segregation and white supremacy. Also, at the national level, the railroads were connecting little towns more than ever before, making travel affordable. And the B&O Railroad in this area was often like buying up properties and encouraging locations where people would want to travel to, so that they would have a reason to get on the train and go somewhere.
That was Baltimore and Ohio, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so also socially, because this is in the middle of the second industrial revolution, a lot of people, especially in the big cities, the employers were realizing that their employees needed to sometimes get out of the city, away from the odors and the crowds and the noise, and just take a break. So they started instituting paid vacations. This was the first time in American history where the average Joe was able to go on vacation. Usually that was reserved for wealthy people. And so all over the country, this idea of being able to go to a resort, to stay the whole summer, maybe a few weeks or months, but sometimes even the whole summer. This was happening all over the place. Mackinac Island, Sarasota Springs, Greenbrier, further south in West Virginia, lots of places were opening up. So resorts were becoming a thing, and this was the era in which the Hilltop was founded.
And, I'm sorry, what year did you say they instituted on vacation? You know?
I don't know the exact year. It was in this period of the,
In
yeah,
1880s.
1870s and 80s, yes. Yes, so in Harper's Ferry, they were still in the midst of the post-Civil War recovery, bless you. After the Civil War, the armory and arsenal that had been there was not rebuilt, so their major industry was gone. There was a lot of physical damage to their buildings because of the war, and they had not really recovered very well yet, even in the 1870s. And I mentioned Storer College, so because of the student population that it had, they didn't have a lot of money, and the school depended a lot on donations from those Northern Free Will Baptist supporters, but they also were often in need of more money. So around 1876, a friend of the president, Nathan Brackett, said, hey, you've got these buildings that the government donated to you, and they use them for dorms during the school year, but they're sitting empty in the summer. And Harper's Ferry did not really have a summer resort yet. They had some hotels down at the river level, but the trains were going by all the time. It was noisy and not a great place to go spend weeks and weeks like people wanted to do. So they decided to try it. They targeted people of modest means in need of an inexpensive vacation. And Nathan Brackett made a deliberate decision to employ some.
Sorry, it slips off.
Oh.
There we go.
What a pain. There we go. He made a deliberate decision to employ some African Americans to come and run the summer boarding house. The first one they tried was the Lockwood House. That's the one, if you've been to Harper's Ferry, there's a cemetery up on a hill, and this is the house right above the cemetery. It looks a little different now because the park took it back to its original look. But he hired Sarah and William Lovett, who were a couple from Winchester who had already had 4 of their 10 children go through Storer College. So by 1876, the second set had been come through and graduated. So the most significant one among those children who helped with running the summer resort was Tom. And the Lovetts were a second-generation free Black family in Winchester. Tom's grandmother, Marcia Weaver, had been freed from slavery when she was 18 years old and was given some property and some money, which the family took to indicate that she was probably the daughter of one of the family members of her enslavers. But she was freed and ended up living, a pretty decent life. She had resources to work with, and so Tom and his family were doing pretty well. They came over, started running that summer boarding house at the Lockwood House, and then he married Lavinia Holloway, which has a very interesting story. Tom, as I mentioned, had just finished graduating from Storer College in 1876. He was trained to be a teacher. He helped with the boarding house, but that was just a summer job. So in the academic years, at least we know through 1879, he was teaching in the county's Black schools. Lavinia was born into slavery in North Carolina, and at age 5, she was taken to Boston. We don't know by whom. But once she got there, that person passed away. And then the record picks up, we know that she was taken in by a wealthy, widowed abolitionist woman in Lee, New Hampshire. And she was pretty much raised as a member of the family there. She was sent to the local grade school. She was sent to a white private school for her high school education. She was sent to a normal school to be trained for teaching. She came back to Lee. She was a teacher in the white grade school in Lee, New Hampshire, and experienced a pretty progressive and prosperous upbringing, much differently than she would have experienced if she had stayed in North Carolina. After she had taught a little while at the grade school, her adopted mother wanted her to go to the South and teach the people of her race. I think that was part of her kind of abolitionist activist mentality, that she should go back south and teach the kids. So Lavinia comes and she passes through Harper's Ferry, through Store College for a bit, goes and teaches for a year at Woodstock, Virginia. Evidently did not like it, and so she comes back through Harper's Ferry, and a friend arranges a hike, and the tour guide of the hike was Tom Lovett, and so that's how she and Tom met each other. Now, evidently, Lavinia did not at that moment consider Tom marriageable material, because she went back to Boston right after that, and she trained to be a nurse at New England Women and Children's Hospital. This was a hospital that was run by female doctors and nurses. Obviously, the patients were women and children, and they trained doctors and nurses, and they had one of the very first skilled nursing programs in the country. Before the Civil War, skilled nursing was not a profession, it was just what women did. But now it had become a profession, and we know that in the mid-1880s or 70s, this school graduated the very first Black woman from their program in skilled nursing, and Lavinia was the second. So in 1880, where is Tom? If you've been to Harper's Ferry, you can tell that that is way too flat to be Harper's Ferry. We find him in Providence, Rhode Island, of all places, working in the home of Lewis Downs, who was a wealthy businessman in Providence, and working as a coachman. So here's a guy who had never been enslaved and never lived in a white household before, but now he's made a choice to go work in a white household and be a servant in that household for a time. Any ideas that you might have as to why he would do that?
Because it was money.
Okay. Way to make money. Any other thoughts? I'm wondering if he's not trying to get some experience of prosperous white society. Perhaps Mr. Downs was mentoring him in business practices, because certainly Store College did not have a business school at that time. Anybody know how far Providence is from Boston?
Not far.
About 50 miles. So that may have had something to do with it as well.
You think he chased her?
We do know. There we go. We do know that Tom and Lavinia had been writing letters to each other through this period. And it could be that she wanted him to experience a little bit of New England, since he had never been that far north. What we do know is that in 1883, they got married. They got married in Brooklyn, New York. Again, I don't know why. I don't think they had any family around at all. It was just the two of them. They were 28 years old, definitely old enough to know what they were doing. But after they got married, they went back to Harper's Ferry, and Tom took up his summer job working at the Lockwood House. Now, this is a picture taken from the vantage point of the second floor of the Lockwood House. And in 1978, their daughter Charlotte gave an interview to the National Park Service. And what she described was that Tom and Lavinia, her parents, came back and has initially lived in the Lockwood house with his parents, but they didn't integrate well with each other. I don't know, again, exactly what the problem was, but I can imagine that Lavinia's life experience was very different from Tom's mother's life experience, and perhaps they didn't get on well because they had different ideas about how to run the business. But nevertheless, this building across the lawn, which we call the Bracket House today, became the Lockwood Annex, and Tom and Lavinia worked over there, and he still helped his parents with the Lockwood House.
I have a question.
Me too.
You said 1978 is when she gave the interview.
Mm-hmm.
How old was she then?
She was in her late 70s.
Okay.
So it is interesting that at this point that while Tom's parents had been running the Lockwood House, it's Tom that develops the reputation for hospitality. I like to think that both his experience in Providence and his choice of a wife maybe made a difference there. But we see that that they've been able to newly furnish the Lockwood House Annex, and interestingly, they're calling it the Hilltop House. So that name is already being used at the annex. In 1890, the newspaper writes that Tom has been a pioneer in entertaining and deserves success. He has a widespread, enviable reputation as a host. And early in 1888, Tom and Lavinia made a decisive move, and they bought the piece of property in Harper's Ferry that had the very best view, I believe. And Lavinia had some money that they used to buy that property because her adopted mother had died in 1882, just that year before they got married. And I know I've seen the will, and I know that she left a bequest for Lavinia. So the question comes up is who would sell this young black couple one of the best properties in town at a time when the town had been struggling? These are the signatures of the 3 school board commissioners, because this property had been owned by the Harpers Ferry School Board ever since 1869, when the town had been laid out in lots on a plat so that the federal government could sell all of its property. This piece of land on Magazine Hill had been called the seminary lot, or the female seminary lot. What I can't determine is whether they had already had a school there at one time in the past, or they were planning to put a school there. But nevertheless, they decided they didn't need it anymore for the school. So these 3 gentlemen signed a deed to the Lovetts for that lovely piece of property. Now, the names are C.B. Wenzel, Richard Henderson, and John Flanagan. That middle name, Richard Henderson, we're going to see a lot more.
So why was it called a seminary lot? Was it?
It was a girls' school.
Oh, okay.
In 1947, Mrs. E.E. Ross gave a talk to the Harpers Ferry Women's Club, and she commented to them, she was talking about education in Harpers Ferry, which is why this was relevant to her talk. Now, she interestingly didn't even mention Storr College as being a school in Harpers Ferry. She only talked about white education in Harpers Ferry, but she comments that this sale of the female lot, seminary lot in 1888 had a decided political odor, even from this distance in time. Her bias is showing, but she may have had a point. Let me just back up. So one of the things that was happening at this period of time was African Americans at that time had, up until then, been very loyal to the Republican Party. Do you know why? Who signed the Emancipation Proclamation? Lincoln, who was a
I didn't realize that.
Republican. Yes. So they were very loyal, but by this time they were starting to be frustrated that they weren't getting any real power in the party, and things weren't changing and happening in their favor.
How much is the acreage that they bought? It doesn't say in there, do you know?
I don't know the exact figures.
You don't have that?
Not in my head.
Okay.
What we see from newspaper articles in the mid-1880s is that the Jefferson County, which is where Harper's Ferry is, Jefferson County Democrats had started making a play for Black voters. So this same school board that sold this lovely piece of property to Tom and Lavinia Lovett also greenlighted a Black grade school in Harper's Ferry for the first time in 25 years, even though they had been required by law to have a school for them as early as 1867. They refused to do that. And this school board made up of three, actually there's a fourth one not on this deed, but 4 Democrats greenlighted the school and sold the property to Lovetts. There's some other evidence as well that this political thing was happening, and this may have been part of it. So we see in January 1890 that they started breaking ground for the new hotel. They were planning on 25 rooms at that time. I think it ended up with more like 35 rooms. And it's going to cost between $3,000 and $4,000. And they were hoping to have the building ready by next summer. They built things way faster back then than they do now. I don't know the source of the construction funding, but I do know that once there was a building and equipment and furniture for the hotel, that a deed of trust was issued for $3,500, which is between $3,000 and $4,000, right? That's what they said it would cost. And the people who loaned the money included Richard Henderson, that name we saw before, John Hyland, and 3 others, all of whom are noted as Democrats. If you can find them in the newspapers. They were active in the Democratic Party in Jefferson County. So again, something's going on there. Richard Henderson had married Betty Bell in 1881, so just about 6 years before. He was 40, she was 39. They're pretty old. I think they're actually distant cousins as well. And they're buried today in the Zion Episcopal Cemetery in Charlestown. But they both lived in the Halltown area. Their families had large farms. They were formerly slaveholding families. Richard fought in the Confederate Army in the Stonewall Brigade. He later organized Confederate veterans reunions. Betty's brother, John Yates Bell, was executed as a Confederate spy at the end of the Civil War. So definitely a surprise move by, at least in my stereotypes of Confederate peoples, to choose to support Black entrepreneurs.
Is that the Potomac in the corner of the right hand? Or what is that?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, good eye. So here's the new Hilltop House. It is a house. As you can see, they're following the same model that Tom was familiar with his parents initially. They charged the same $6 per week that was being charged at the Lockwood House, which they considered a moderate rate. And you can see it's not initially designed as a luxury resort.
Back then, do you have any idea what that would be today, for $6 a week? I don't. Okay.
And this right here is Tom Lovett.
Sure.
I don't have any pictures in which Lavinia is identified, unfortunately. So I just want to mention this because it's interesting. In some of the past documents I've read, there's been a few, like a Park Service report, some mentions in other books about the Lovetts and kind of considering them a Lovett dynasty. But if you think about the difference between leasing a house 3 months out of the year or 4 versus owning the place, you can see that there's a big difference between what Tom and Lavinia did versus what Tom's parents were doing. They had the option of being open year-round if they wanted. They didn't have the calendar limitations of the school needing to use the building. They could have a separate restaurant facilities and, of course, freedom to make improvements and changes to the building. I believe the Lockwood House didn't have indoor restrooms until well into the 1900s. So big difference between owning versus leasing. And of course, the house was an instant success. They got raves by the white press. Comfort of guests is well provided for. The high character of his table, excellent reputation, many conveniences, first-class accommodations. The white press always had positive things to say about Tom Lovett and his hotel, which again is an interesting thing. But I think he was making money not only for his investors somehow, but also for other businesses around the town. Now, Lavinia was known to be the manager of the kitchen, and this is a picture from their early brochure around 1902. And I didn't even see this until I put it on a PowerPoint, but there's a woman right here. Can you see her kind of shadowy, faded out figure? And I want to believe that's Lavinia. That's the closest I have to a photo of her. So right away, they start adding and making improvements. So they built a dance pavilion 2 years in. People loved to dance, especially when they were on vacation. It was very popular. They had live music every night. 8 years in, they added and doubled the size of the hotel. Again, they borrowed money from Mr. Henderson and then $1,000 from the Dittmeyer brothers. You can see that the original house is pretty much wood frame. There was a lot more brick in the addition. I thought it's interesting to make this comparison when you think that about the same period, 1882, 1890, up in Pinmar Park, Pennsylvania, which is about the same distance from Washington, D.C. as Harper's Ferry, they had at least 2 hotels that would hold 500 people, and that there were more than this. So remember that Tom's working at a much lower scale. Harper's Ferry is a smaller town. It's limited because it's on a peninsula, and they never worked at this scale. But he did continually make improvements. He added electricity, steam heat, indoor plumbing. They had hot and cold running water well before the residents in Harper's Ferry had those amenities. And they expanded further in 1904. So up at the top is the 2 houses that I showed you from 1898. And here they built the dining room back here in the kitchen, and they began to use this as all guest rooms since they didn't need to use it for the dining area. Another loan from Mr. Henderson for $2,807.39 precisely. This is kind of fun. So the wife of our mayor in Harper's Ferry currently, they live in the home of her great-grandparents who lived in Harper's Ferry back then. And her grandmother, I believe, is Clara Towns. And this shows you several of the invitations from the early 1900s that she received to go to dances at the Hilltop House. So there's one from Thanksgiving, Easter, New Year's. I think there was a Washington's birthday dance. The local people, especially during the winter months when there were no visitors in town, just like today in Harper's Ferry, people don't come in the winter time, but the local residents took advantage of that time to hold dances, and they love to do that. And I love that it would go until 2 o'clock in the morning with their dances. All right, so in 1905, Richard Henderson suddenly drops dead out in his barn. And now there's this big question, what's going to happen to those loans? Well, it turns out that his wife must have been a supporter all along of this relationship with the Lovetts. So she pays off those initial investors that loaned him that first $3,500. She consolidates all the prior loans and issues a new deed of trust for $9,200. which is about $300,000 in today's dollars. Okay, and then just a minute to talk about the guests at the Hilltop House. You may have noticed in that first picture of the house with all the guests standing outside, they all looked white. Did anybody catch that? Yeah. So, they pretty much were an all-whites hotel, which is surprising to some people since they were a Black family owning the hotel. But remember that this is the Jim Crow era, and white people were used to being segregated and would not have stayed in lodgings that were shared with African Americans, unfortunately. And Tom, I think as a businessman, decided to go with the population that had the most disposable income and the time to go do the vacations. Now, certainly African American families love to come to Harper's Ferry too, especially the wealthy families from Washington, D.C. and Baltimore area. They would also come to Harper's Ferry when they could to stay during the summers, but their only option was one of the dorms at Storer College. Lincoln Hall was where they were assigned to, and there's plenty of documentation that they were limited to staying in that dorm, and there's never a mention of anybody, even in the Black newspapers from Washington, D.C., they never talk about staying at the Hilltop House.
So it was not in the Green Book, Alex.
Not in the Green Book. Now, the Green Book didn't start until the 1930s, which is well after the Lovetts. And it actually is in there 1 year in the Green Book. But I'll get to that later. Okay, so there's a couple of other pictures of the interior of the hotel during those early years, and we'll stop and take a few questions before we move on.
So my granddad was alive. One of the guys was getting to be 80-something years old. One of his favorite places to go dancing, big dance swing, was Penmore Park in Pennsylvania, Maryland. My mom's talking about my mom's dad, yes, and that was my favorite place. So yeah, so I know a lot about Penmore Park. Every year we see it for his birthday. The Winchester, different things I take those to, so this is good. I would say one of the questions is on the second PowerPoint slide, which I'm going to go back to. We talked a lot about the history and the genesis of the Lovetts, and it's interesting because back in those times, we had divorce, we had a lot of interracial, race mixing, different melting pot, a hodgepodge. I had a picture. We didn't see a lot of all this. That's why I always tell people the biggest race is human race, culture, and mythology. So it's interesting you see the mixing and the mingling, the women's rights. It's interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, anybody else?
What was the name of the house that you said that the African Americans stayed at?
Lincoln Hall.
Lincoln Hall.
Yes. Okay, well, we'll go on. We'll have another chance at the end for more questions. So the Hilltop House had 22 years of great success. And this is an excerpt from one of my letters from Professor Saunders that I mentioned to you. He says, Mr. Lovett's hotel burned last Wednesday afternoon. He lost nearly everything. The school turned out to help fight the fire and do all possible. No one was hurt seriously. So you can see there what was left of the building after the fire. The shorter foundation is, of course, that original building that was mostly wood, and there's a little bit more that remained, but it's still just a skeleton. This happened in December when the hotel was closed because people didn't come in the winter. But it turns out that Tom was there that day. His family spent most of the winters in Washington, D.C., which is another part of the story you can check out in the book if you're interested. But he happened to be in Harper's Ferry that day, and he said that there had been a brush fire out in the yard, and it was a very breezy day, and it spread quickly, and it just took over the house before he could do anything. Certainly they had neighbors come from all around and from Storer College to come and help, and they carried out a lot of the furniture and saved some things from inside, but they couldn't save the building. It was insured for $15,000. Fortunately, not enough. So at this point, the Lovetts decide, I believe, to really build on their reputation and the experience they have from 2 decades. And they hired some well-known architects who were from Clarksburg, West Virginia. They had just finished building the White High School in Harper's Ferry, and the same builder took on this project. And so they was gonna charge, it cost $30,000 to $40,000, which is twice the amount of their insurance. Mrs. Henderson reissued her note. From all evidence I could find, the Lovetts didn't really pay back any of those loans. They may have been paying interest on them. It's really unclear to me how the Hendersons benefited from this arrangement, because in the public financial records, there's really no evidence of them getting paid back or making much money off it. But they must have somehow, or they wouldn't have kept doing it, but it's just not clear from the available evidence. But isn't that a beautiful building?
Did you tell us about the Hendersons? What were they business people? Were they very wealthy? Were they from DC or what?
So they lived in Jefferson County. They both were former slave owning families who had big farms in Halltown, which is like next, just over from Harper's Ferry a little ways. And both of the families, the Hendersons and the Bells, were fairly wealthy, still had some wealth after the Civil War.
And I'm sorry, what town?
Halltown was the name of the community.
H-A-L-L.
Yes. Yes. So I want to read a little excerpt from the book about the night when they opened this version of the Hilltop House. Finally, on Thanksgiving evening, November 27, 1913, it only took less than a year to build that. The enterprising young men of Harper's Ferry celebrated the formal opening of the Hilltop with a huge ball. Nearly 100 couples attended, coming from both near and far. They waltzed and danced the two-step well into the night, beginning at 9 p.m., accompanied by the 5-piece Washington Select Orchestra. A few daring couples danced to the tango, but modified their movement so as not to scandalize any of their more conservative onlookers. The grand party took a 1-hour intermission at midnight for a feast of fried oysters, salads, sandwiches, and beverages no stronger than delightful coffee served with rich cream. Logs blazed and crackled cheerily in the hotel office's massive fireplace, which could be seen from the dance floor, but was set far enough apart that the gentlemen could retire there for a leisurely smoke between numbers. The dancers went home at 3 a.m., exhausted but delighted with their evening. All right, they enjoyed this beautiful hotel for 6 years. And then, while the Lovetts were excellent business people, they were great with hospitality, they had really lousy luck, and the hotel caught fire again. This time, Tom said it might be faulty wiring. Another person on the scene thought that maybe a coal oil stove had exploded. The guests were at breakfast. This was in June, so they didn't have guests in the hotel. I guess we'll never know for sure. Once again, the neighborhood all came, carried out furniture. Guests scurried back to their rooms to gather their belongings as fast as they could. Of course, the people near the origin of the fire weren't able to get their things. But Mrs. Henderson showed up again, consolidated her prior loans, gave them $21,000 more. I think it's pretty fair to say at this point, Mrs. Henderson owned the hotel. Yeah. And this time looks a little different. They used as much of the walls as they could that were remaining, but not nearly as elegant as that previous version. It's a floor shorter, and it looks very squat. Even the roof on the tower is different. They fully opened in August of 1920. You can see there's another $15,000 more in loans from Mrs. Henderson. If you visited the Hilltop, this is the building you visited. Now, you may not recognize it because subsequent owners did a lot of renovations and additions, and not always very attractively done, but this is the building. Yes.
I noticed the date is 1920. And then it's interesting, 9 years later, that would have been the stock market crash. So we think about the enormous of all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that.
Very much, yes. So, one of the things also for folks who visited the Hilltop, if you read any of their brochures or read information while you were there, there's a lot of claims about people who had visited the Hilltop, including President Wilson, Mark Twain, Calvin Coolidge, all these folks. And so we tried to track down documentation to confirm that they had actually been there. One thing we found was, especially these claims about Mark Twain, started in 1955 after Dixie Killam bought the hotel. I don't know if anybody recognizes the name Dixie, but he owned it from 1955 to 1986. He's also the one who started the Harper's Ferry John Brown Museum. If you knew about Jellystone Park or campground, there was like an underground cave. Dixie was in on that. He was quite the promoter in Harper's Ferry. And you'll see 1957, he says it's a favorite inn of President Woodrow Wilson and the celebrated Mark Twain. In 1958, it's a favorite retreat of 5 United States presidents and Mark Twain. And then in 59, he's back to a hotel once frequented by Mark Twain, a president or two, and other celebrities. I'm certain that he had some reason to believe Mark Twain had been there, but we cannot find any evidence of it ourselves. So it is true that President Wilson was there. He came once for lunch in 1915 with Edith Galt, who was his fiancée at that time. His first wife had passed away, and he was madly in love with Edith, and he brought her to the Hilltop for lunch. And then they came back the next year, they got married, and they came back for dinner. That's it as far as we know. I wouldn't say it was a favorite resort of Wilson, but he was there a couple of times, and many members of his cabinet also visited the Hilltop after this. And as a result of his visit, Vincent Astor, who was the son of John Jacob Astor, who went down with the Titanic, he also visited the Hilltop. So again, Mark Twain, there is no evidence that he was ever back in Harper's Ferry after the Civil War, or certainly not after 1890 when the Hilltop was built. I don't think he enjoyed going to the South after that. I don't, even in that interview with Charlotte Lovett, they asked her if she remembered Mark Twain being there, and she said no, and they said, how about Samuel Clemens?
That's a suit.
No.
Right.
No, not him either. Well, how would you know if he was there? Well, I would have seen his bushy hair, she said. So even she did not remember him, and I feel like that if he had been there, they would have remembered. The Lovetts never advertised any well-known guests. Okay. So it really wasn't until Dixie that any of these well-known guests were promoted. We do know that Carl Sandburg must have been there because in 1928, he wrote a volume of poems in which he mentions Harper's Ferry and the Hilltop House. And of course, W.E.B. Du Bois was in Harper's Ferry at least 3 times that I know of, but again, no evidence that he was at the Hilltop. He was at Storer College is where he was.
First PhD from Harper.
Yes. So in addition to having the struggles over the fires and having to rebuild the Hilltop twice, there was also new technology that changed. There we go. New technology changed the way people did their vacations, and instead of taking a train and planting themselves in a single location for long periods of time, they were in their cars now. More and more people were owning automobiles, and they were traveling from place to place to place. And the Hilltop became maybe a weekend destination. Their restaurant was more of a destination than the hotels. People would stop along the way. And so things really changed with the business model because of that. And then in 1923, the biggest change of all is that Betty Henderson passed away. And at that time, they owed her today's equivalent of $1.2 million. Her estate sold the debt at 50 cents on the dollar to a couple of brothers in Washington, D.C., who took over the hotel in 1926. The Lovetts were age 71 at this time. They were, old enough to retire. It was probably not the way they wanted to go out. They only got their personal possessions out of it, and I don't think they made any profit from it because they were so deep in debt. And their daughter Charlotte even noted that you would see we really came out with very little because of the two fires. Yeah, so at this point, their older daughter Florence had gotten married finally, and she was like in her late 30s and had moved to Brooklyn, New York. Charlotte had already moved up to Brooklyn, and when they sold the hotel, Tom and Lavinia followed them and moved in, and all the Lovetts lived together in a house in Brooklyn, New York, and remained there until, interestingly, after Tom and Lavinia were both gone, Charlotte and Florence continued to live together, and when they retired from the school system, they were both teachers. They came back to Harper's Ferry and bought a little house and stayed in Harper's Ferry until they both passed away. So here's again the evolution of the Hilltop House. I love this little newspaper excerpt. Talks about the noble mountains, the view was soul satisfying, cool breezes and a fragrant atmosphere. No more beautiful sight for a hotel could be found. Okay, any more questions come up in that last section? Yes.
So the two daughters, neither of them married?
One had been married. That's how they got to Brooklyn.
Okay, which one was it?
Florence.
Florence married. Okay, I didn't quite get it. Okay.
Yeah, Florence was named after one of Tom's sisters. His younger sister was Florence. Anything else? We'll ask you another question. What inspiration do you draw from this story of the Lovetts? Yes.
Cherish what you have in front of you and teach yourself, educate yourself.
Okay. Okay. What other thoughts do you have?
Do you have Florence's last name?
Martin.
Martin.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting that, being in the Jim Crow era as it was, I'm sure that people said rude things to them. I'm sure people looked down upon them merely, and felt superior merely because of the different skin color. But the Lovetts seemed to really enjoy what they were doing. At either one of those points when the hotel burned, they could have chosen to get out of the business. But instead, they forged ahead and rebuilt and kept going. And I think it's amazing how much they must have enjoyed what they were doing. Yes.
So the Hendersons lent money to the Lovetts to keep on rebuilding this house. How unusual was that to lend that much money to a Black couple? That must have been pretty unusual.
I think it was,
That's a
yes.
You have to think about the terms back then. If you look at the government and politics, they teach you about redlining. So there are those terms, redlining, white flight, gentrification. Used to be called Chocolate City, now it's gentrified. So back then, all those laws and terminologies and jargon vernacular are all in the plate. Just think about the sound of time.
Interestingly, Harper's Ferry is unique in that aspect because of Store College. They had a very progressive president who, even when the federal government was divesting itself of its property in Harper's Ferry, the Store College administrators started buying up property. And some of those lots they kept to expand the school campus, but many of those lots they sold to African-American families in town, and thus shortcutting discrimination that might have happened. So around Store College and on another section of Harper's Ferry, there are some very integrated neighborhoods, or were at the time through the 20th century. They didn't get crowded into a Black neighborhood, but they had choices to buy some really nice properties. And there was no redlining in Harper's Ferry. There are very few racial covenants that I've run across. It was a very interesting situation there. And also, again, a context in which a Black family could become entrepreneurs and have a successful business. Yes.
What's the current status of the house?
I'll tell you what I know. I don't work for the owners, so I don't know any inside information. But they bought the property in 2007 and discovered that the building was structurally unsound. There was a long period of, I'm trying to think of a nice word, a long period in which some people in town put up barriers to them moving forward. But in 2022, they were able to deconstruct the building because it was not savable. So they kept all the stones from the building and have them in pallets waiting to be reused. The owners want to build a hotel that reflects that second really elegant version that the Lovetts had. And they told the Harper's Ferry Town Council a few months ago that they are on pause right now, waiting for interest rates to go down.
And who did you say bought it in 2007?
An investor group with the acronyms SWAN. So I think I missed, we had a question earlier about the Green Book. So of course the Lovetts sold the hotel in 1926. The McKee brothers, well, one of them died pretty quickly. So McKee owned it until the mid-1930s, and we're into the Depression now. And there was a really bad flood in Harper's Ferry that knocked out both bridges into town across the Shenandoah and Potomac. So the hotel was barely open at that time. And that is interestingly the time in which it appears in the Green Book. And it says to contact Mrs. Drew, who I haven't been able to track down. That's the only time I know that they had it in the Green Book from any of the versions I've been able to find.
What is the Green Book? I don't know what that is.
Sure. The Green Book was a collection that, I don't know where the gentleman was from, but he started this directory of lodging and restaurants where it was safe for African Americans to visit, because a lot of places were not safe.
Gotcha.
I wonder, because Harper's Ferry with the floods and coming through and wiping out all the industrial area and the bridges and all of that, it sounds to me like maybe that would be real estate that a lot of people would not be interested in, to build in the town that has this flood issue. And that maybe that's why there wasn't that much attention on why should this prime piece of property go to African American owners when, the white folk want to own all the good stuff. I don't know. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, they had the advantage of being up on the hill, safe from the flooding.
Oh, the beautiful site.
Yeah. Right after 1869 is when the government sold off all those properties, and a lot of people bought property down at river level, and then in 1870 was a terrible flood that wiped out a lot of it, and those people reneged on their contracts to buy that property and were very unhappy that they got saddled with lots that could be totally wiped out. And so, yeah, that's been a struggle for the town, and that's why the Park Service ended up taking over the whole lower town area, was because businesses couldn't, and homes for sure, could not safely exist there.
Yes.
I like all the dates and how they're referenced. Gives you the side of the towns of the air that one was living in. Also, like the League of Doors, John Calvin Coolidge. So they were silent camp, but technically John Calvin Coolidge and all the other luminaries at the time, Mark Twain. I find it interesting when you look at the times and the size and you have different things going on with the people, with the Wilson, also the Wilson Bridge, which is called County. And it's interesting how you look at it and then you think about what if you don't know what you have in front of you? Historical matters, so to speak. What if you don't know the truth? What if you don't know, what the truth is?
Yeah, it's really important
I love
to
history,
to look at history, to try to understand it and try to get to the bottom of things. Yes. All right, oh, yes.
A little interesting aside, if you are a geocacher, that it was before they closed it all off, a very famous and well sought after geocache right within the Boxwoods. And it had a great view of down at Harper's Ferry, but then they closed it off and you can't go back there anymore, because I've been up there several times, you know.
Well, they have opened the gates now, by the way. You can go in any time during daylight hours. You enter from Washington Street, corner of Washington and Columbia, and go up that way.
Oh, okay.
So the town asked them last spring to please open up so we can see the view.
So are they working at all on? No, okay. So it's still severe disrepair, I guess.
There's nothing, there's no hotel there at all now.
Oh, okay.
The only thing left is the original cottage that was in the annex building across the way.
Yeah.
They took off all that two-story hotel-looking building that was connected to it, and the little cottage is still there, and that's it.
But they did buy up some of the properties down below,
Yes.
which are historical.
Right.
Some of them they kept, and they cleaned them up a lot, so.
Yes, and they stabilized them with new roofs, and someday they say they're planning to use those as well, but that's after the hotel gets built. Okay, if you are interested in learning more and want to buy the book, you can find out some more discoveries like how many nights Tom spent in jail, what was their relationship with the DC's wealthy Black families, and why they went to school there instead of just Door College, where was Tom when he died, and more detail about who owned the hotel in subsequent years. So thank you so much for your engagement, and really appreciate you coming.